Welcome to Darwin's birthday party. This is actually our 7th annual Darwin Day event. Darwin's 204th birthday will be tomorrow, and we are celebrating it this evening. Before I introduce our special guest, Geoffrey Miller, I'd like to do some housekeeping and give some thanks. This event is more than just a talk. Not only is Geoffrey a purely significant international speaker, and we are fortunate to have him, and we also will have our first ever Darwinian-themed costume party immediately after, and as I'm telling my students, it is just about obligatory. So there will be free food there, and it will be at the terrace. I'd like to thank the Evolutionary Studies Club that was integral in making this happening. The Evolutionary Studies Board, which has been very active this year in working toward improvements in the program and the future of the program. CAS, which is funding us for now I think the 3rd or 4th year in a row. The bookstore, which apparently is donating some of Geoffrey's books. There will be a book signing after this. We appreciate the efforts of the bookstore. The New Paltz Evolutionary Psych Lab that has, in combination, done a bunch of the work on all this. The teachers of the Evolutionary Studies Seminar course, Alice Andrews, Spencer Mass, and Ken Nystrom, thank you for all your work in connecting your course with this particular event and the seminar series. Alana DeBaney from the psychology subject pool, Alana's in the corner if you could do a little, has been working very hard to help connect this with the psychology curriculum. If you're a psychology student and you're expecting to get credit, please do see Alana near the end, and she will help you with paperwork. Thank you, Alana. Melvin Phillip, where's our friend Melvin? Melvin, the past president of the Evolutionary Studies Club, was integral in setting this all up. Melvin's the cool guy with the hat right there. Brianna, where's Brianna? She is the assistant to the Evolutionary Studies program. If you're a student in the room and you're not yet signed up for the minor for some reason, you can see Brianna and she will help you sign up for the minor. And finally, where's Andrea? Am I not seeing Andrea? Andrea Varga from theater has been very integral in putting this event together as well. The Evolutionary Studies program has expanded in the past several years. We had been funded by the National Science Foundation in an effort to expand evolutionary studies in higher education. We just, along with the folks at Binghamton, submitted a new grant proposal hoping for a lot more money to help further expand the reach of Darwin's big ideas into higher education, and we will let you know if we get it. But there's been an awful lot of growth in the program, in a nationwide scale, actually in an international scale. This is our 7th annual Darwin Day. It started in 2006. In 2006, Jem Waldo from biology, myself, Tom Nolan, Eugene Heath, Yasser Khalifa, a couple of folks sat down and said, what if we just had a couple professors get up and talk about evolution? And people said to me, why don't we get LC 104 because we don't think it would do well if a lot of people don't show up. I said, okay. And so we literally put together an event that was just 4 professors on campus talking about evolution from their own academic area or perspective. The room filled up. People were standing in the aisles. People were sitting on the stairs. It was nearly mayhem. There was obvious interest campus-wide in the topic of what Darwin had to say and this idea of Darwin's theories applied broadly beyond the scope of biology and geology. One of the goals of the Evolutionary Studies program is to expand evolutionary thinking across academic areas with the idea that evolution is such a powerful idea that it really can help elucidate all aspects of higher education. An event we have coming up on the 21st will feature Andrew Faust, who is a local permaculturist who talks about how evolution can help us inform agriculture, permaculture, and architecture, just as one example. We hope to see you there. In recent years, evolutionary studies have been applied to help us better understand medicine, health, education, politics, and now largely to the work of Geoffrey Miller, the world of business is starting to to take the lead in helping us apply evolution to understanding the nature of money and transactions and all that. More work needs to be done. As we know, there's an awful lot of political resistance to the nature of evolution. There's a very high proportion of people in this country and others who reject the idea of evolution outright, and the Evolutionary Studies program is largely designed to sort of help with that. So I'd like to talk with everyone further about this at the reception. The reception will be immediately after. There will be a book signing. There's going to be a Darwinian-themed costume party, free food, and that will be at the terrace immediately after. So I hope to see you there. So with that said, I'd like to introduce Geoffrey Miller. He's a psychology professor at the University of New Mexico. He's currently the Henry Kaufman Visiting Professor of Business at NYU. He's got a Ph.D. in psychology from Stanford University, which we like to say, because it's accurate, is considered the best psychology department in the country. I think tied with New Paltz, pretty close to New Paltz. He's got undergraduate degrees in biology and psychology from Columbia University, and his work is just absolutely significant. He's got many publications on lots of different topics, all taking an evolutionary perspective and telling us how this perspective can help elucidate new angles of what it means to be human. His theory of sexual selection applied to human creative processes has really reshaped what we know it means to be human. He's got more publications than you can think of. He's published in top journals, Evolution and Human Behavior, Quarterly Review of Biology, and more. He's published several books, including The Mating Mind, which was published in 2000. Very much changed the way we understand things like art, humor, morality, and generally the nature of being human. His work has appeared in countless media outlets: New York Times, Time, Newsweek, New Scientist, Science, Nature, and lots more. While he's visiting New York on a sabbatical now, he will be speaking at Yale, Penn, Harvard, and now SUNY New Paltz. Please join me in welcoming Geoffrey Miller.
Thanks, Glenn, for a great introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here. I haven't been in New Paltz before. Hope to come back again. You guys have a great opportunity here to hear a lot of interdisciplinary speakers, not just me, but a continuing series throughout the term, so please get in touch with Glenn if you want to hear more about that. Glenn and I actually co-edited a book together, but we haven't actually met very often. Our book was Mating Intelligence, and Glenn's just come out with a kind of sequel, but that's probably better written and more integrative, called Mating Intelligence Unleashed. So look for that soon. Unleashed. It's Darwinian mayhem. I got interested in consumerism because it seemed like something that evolutionary psychology could help illuminate and critique and perhaps even overturn. One problem that Darwinian studies has had in the past is that it's often accused of defending the status quo, being politically conservative. But I thought if there's a way to understand runaway consumerism of the sort that's been kind of wrecking the global economy and the environment, maybe that's a good thing. And maybe we could get some Darwinian traction in understanding issues like how did we get from a primordial soup 3.5 billion years ago to Ben Affleck promoting Axe body spray to promote your short-term mating success. How did that happen? How did the tree of life end up in this funny little corner of human nature and us evolving technology and cultures that result in this obsessive consumerism? Well, we have to go back a little ways, I think, to understand the origins of our instincts to display, to signal to others. Sex, in terms of sexual recombination of genes, evolved about 1.2 billion years ago in single-celled organisms like these bacteria doing bacterial conjugation, exchanging genes. And as soon as sexual recombination evolved, it made it much, much easier for lineages, species to purge, to get rid of bad mutations, and to spread good mutations. It basically increases the genetic variance in your offspring. And your offspring that are bad, that have an above average number of bad mutations, selection gets rid of them, gets rid of those bad mutations more effectively. And it can recombine the good mutations much more effectively. So evolution really started to take off because of that mutation purging power. But things didn't really get interesting until the Cambrian explosion, 543 million years ago, plus or minus a couple of million years. Why did that happen? I think there's a good explanation. Some biologists are arguing that eyes evolved. The lights went on in the world. Species could suddenly see. They could see predators and prey, and perhaps most importantly, eyes could see potential mates. And that means instead of just conjugating with random bacteria near you, you can actually see the form, coloration, and symmetry of potential mates. And that led to an astonishing increase in biodiversity. As soon as eyes evolve, you go from 3 to 38 major phyla in terms of animal designs, including these reconstructions. So you get a lot of creativity as soon as mate choice comes onto the scene, as soon as animals can choose each other for visual appearance, and perhaps also sound and other distance senses. So ever since the Cambrian explosion, ever since that happened, 500 million years ago, evolution has not just been survival of the fittest, it's been natural selection for efficient survival, finding food, avoiding predators, etc., but also sexual selection for conspicuous signals, right? Let me see if I can get this on. Can you hear me through that? Okay. The pedipalps of the mantis shrimp to attract mates, the tail of the guppy. You also get not just morphological bodily ornaments, but behavioral ornaments. The Tungara frog producing a call to attract mates. The mandrel's bright face, the peacock's tail, Darwin's favorite example of sexual selection. But also the bowerbird, imitating the calls of other forest creatures, constructing huge bowers to attract mates, ornamenting them with shells, flowers, berries, etc. And then humans doing all kinds of behavioral ornamentation. Red ochre to decorate the hair and the skin, cave paintings 30,000 years ago, and prestige-branded luxury goods. The most impressive thing to me about Darwin was that he did not develop a purely reductionistic, materialistic view of the world. That's an error. That's people who haven't actually read Darwin's work on sexual selection or how orchids are pollinated by pollinators or the expression of emotions. Darwin actually understood that the mind of animals has played an important role in evolution throughout its history. It's not a material world, it's largely a mental world, and that's particularly true for sexual selection. Really impressive sexual ornamentation, like the plumage of the Argus pheasant here, is a result of intelligent design. But it's not intelligent design by deity, it's intelligent design by the females of that species, favoring the males who create the most compelling 3D depth illusions on their tails. Darwin found the Argus pheasant much more impressive than the peacock because the peacock just has eye spots. The Argus pheasant actually uses shading to create the illusion of these ball and socket joints. The feathers of the male don't have to understand how the depth perception system of the female works. All they have to do is evolve to exploit it, to stimulate it, to make it excited. And basically, after Origin of Species, 1859, most of Darwin's attention turned to how the minds of animals shape evolution in many, many different ways. And of course, the costly signaling, the signaling of one's quality is not just done to attract mates. It's not just about mating. That is important, and you can attract mates with beauty and creativity, as with the cichlid fish, the peacock, the bowerbird. But you can also deter same-sex rivals. You demonstrate signals of formidability, strength, power, fierceness, desperation. As with horns, antlers, long canine teeth, big upper body muscles, swords, etc. But also kids, offspring, soliciting parental investment, right? Offspring evolved to be cute, to beg with bright red gapes to get the worm, to have distinctive juvenile facial coloration, to do little cartoons like my daughter did here at age 14. This is Sherlock and Watson as kids dressed up in cow suits. And Sherlock is saying something like, "Stop talking, you're giving us away." And that's cute, and that makes me want to buy my daughter a private education at Westminster School, which is too expensive. But anyway, the kinds of signals that we send, the quality signals, can be, again, they can be physical, they can be bodily traits, or they can be mental behavioral traits. Switch back to this mic. So they can be physical indicators of fitness, which can also be physical fitness indicators. They can be design traits of the body, like the masculinization or feminization or symmetry or averageness of facial structure, height, as with human males selected for height, and also female height doubling in the last 4 million years. Upper body muscles, lower body muscles, fat deposits like breasts, buttocks, thigh fat, cheek pad fat, and general health, right? That's all impressive. That's all sought by both sexes, in both sexes, exemplified by athletes like Michael Jordan or Maria Sharapova. But we also have behavioral indicators of physical fitness, right? Sports, ritualized competition, highly aerobically demanding dance, and even foreplay and copulatory courtship, right? Prolonged copulation. And that led me to a little work which I'm vastly embarrassed to talk about, but which I will anyway, on female orgasm as a mate choice system. And I'm not hugely obsessed with this in terms of my scientific research, but it kind of illustrates the new way of thinking that you can develop if you think about, okay, how does mate choice interact with signaling? William Eberhard, the aptly named biologist who studies copulatory courtship, pointed out that female choice doesn't stop once copulation begins. Females can continue choice in terms of whose sperm do I use, many insect females can store sperm from multiple males and use it later based on choice. Or who do I keep copulating with repeatedly? In species like ours, where a single copulation is not that likely to result in a baby. And Eberhard pointed out that in species with this so-called cryptic female choice, where females continue to choose after copulation starts, it favors males who do longer, more vigorous copulation and who evolve larger, more complex male genitalia. So here's an example where a little male insect is doing some amazing foreplay during copulation. He's actually lightly scratching the female's eye with his little forelimb, and she really likes that. And the better he does that, the longer she'll copulate with him. The key point here is that it used to be thought the female orgasm was a kind of wonky system. It didn't work very well. It was a byproduct of male orgasm. And the reason why sex researchers thought that is female orgasm's not reliable. It doesn't happen all the time under all conditions, right? It's just a big sexual fail as a system. But if you view female orgasm as a mate choice system, it shouldn't work all the time. It shouldn't just fire off indiscriminately. That doesn't give you any discriminative power. In fact, female orgasm should depend on what male is it, what are his traits, do you trust him, is the situation propitious, and it should track all of that. And it's not necessarily that it upsucks the sperm that promotes short-term fertilization. The real power of female orgasm is, do you want to copulate with that male again? Or not? Was it fun or not? And in a recent paper, we made the prediction that female orgasm should be heritable, there should be genes for it, but it should be relatively genetically uncorrelated with other mental traits. The genes that influence orgasm should not necessarily be the same as the genes that influence emotional stability or intelligence or whatever. And in a large sample of Australian female twins, 2,900 of them, we showed that that indeed is the case. The propensity for having orgasms is genetically heritable, but it's not like the neurotic women don't have orgasms. It's genetically uncorrelated with those personality traits. And the recent maximally embarrassing study we did was on female orgasmic choice for penis size. This came out a few months ago. About 300 Scottish women and an online survey. And the women who said they preferred longer penises, like I guess Eva Mendes here, are more likely to have vaginal orgasms during intercourse, but they're not more likely to have clitorally centered orgasms or masturbation-induced orgasms. So we interpret that as some suggestive evidence that vaginal female orgasm really is about assessing penis size, particularly width, whereas clitoral orgasm might be about assessing male theory of mind, or kindness, or sexual experience. And I've got Jill Biden up there just because if you haven't seen the YouTube gaffe of Jill admiring Joe Biden's size, you just have to watch it. When she says, "I've seen Joe up close," and makes this gesture, and then Joe turns bright red, and Jill turns red, and everybody votes for Joe. And they win. Okay. Other physical fitness indicators. It used to be thought that female humans lost estrus, that there were no conspicuous signals of estrus in humans that would indicate when humans are fertile. So we don't have bright red swellings like some other primates just before ovulation. But actually, a couple hundred papers over the last 15 years now show ovulation's not that hidden. It's not that cryptic. Females can kind of narrowcast cues of fertility to favored males. Females, when they're at peak fertility just before ovulation, mid-cycle, about 9 to 14 days after menstruation starts, do more mate search, they wander around more, they go to more nightclubs, they have more actual affairs, they have more sexual fantasies about men other than their boyfriends or husbands. They're more effective at avoiding sexual coercion and incest. They answer telephone calls from male relatives less, but talk just as much to female relatives. They display more attractive voices, scents, skin, nonverbal behavior, personalities, mental health, creativity, and clothing at peak fertility. And in the sort of pre-session here, I described the study of lap dancers, showing that lap dancers earn higher tips at peak fertility, about $70 an hour compared to about $50 an hour in the luteal phase after ovulation, or $35 an hour in the menstrual phase. And the contraceptive pill eliminates that effect, and you don't get the mid-cycle earnings boost. But what I really want to talk about is mental traits. How do we get there from physical traits? Well, there's lots of different costly signaling principles. Conspicuous waste is one. When Thorsten Veblen talked about conspicuous consumption in 1899, he was mostly talking about waste. The wealthy can afford to waste a lot of money on conspicuous luxuries. So any physical or mental trait that involves just big size, a lot of mass or energy or material or risk can be a reliable signal, because if you didn't have that mass or energy or time to burn, you couldn't fake the signal. So Schwarzenegger's upper body muscles, Anne Hathaway's lips, right? These are all costly, reliable signals of health. But that's not the only principle of conspicuous signaling. There's also conspicuous precision. Can you grow a face that is very average or typical for your population? If you can, your mutation load is probably low. Can you grow a face or a body that's highly bilaterally symmetric? That's hard to do. Can you produce patterns with high precision, like P.J. Harvey keeping rhythm or melody precisely with a musical instrument? Or more generally, can you produce a body or behavior that has a high fit and finish, to use consumerist terms? A third principle is conspicuous creativity. Do something different, novelty or variety, right? A new hairstyle, a new joke, something interesting that you can say. And a fourth principle for a highly social species like ours, where we do a lot of gossip, is conspicuous reputation, right? Have people heard of you? Are you Lindsey Vonn with multiple gold medals? Are you POTUS? Do you have high status, prestige, familiarity, recognition? What is your personal brand value? What is your brand equity? From that point of view, in terms of conspicuous waste, precision, creativity, reputation, the human brain is a wonderful potential source of fitness indicators. Not because it's efficient or reliable, but precisely because it's so vulnerable. Because lots of things go wrong with the brain. For example, the brain is very vulnerable to mutations. About more than half of the genome is expressed in the human brain, probably a lot more than that. And that means that more than half of the harmful mutations that hit any chromosome will disrupt brain function to some degree, making you a little bit dumber, a little bit crazier, a little bit less creative, a little bit less impressive on a first date. Now, when I'm talking about mate choice for brains as sexual ornaments, I'm not talking about men or women kind of raying up raw brain size, right? Raw brain size would actually be too easy to fake. You just grow a big fluid-filled organ that didn't actually do anything, right? So I'm not talking about head size. I'm talking about what you can do with your brain. And that's what I focused on with the Mating Mind book, is these mental fitness indicators, mental behavioral ways to say, how good are my genes, how well does my brain work? Some of these also have important social and survival payoffs. They're sort of half practical and half ornamental, right? All of these are sexually attractive, but they also promote foraging, parasite avoidance, predator avoidance, parenting ability. So all of these have multiple functions, and they probably have been shaped by sexual selection to some degree, but not just sexual selection. The ones on the right, I think, are mostly ornamental and probably mostly shaped as signals through sexual selection and social selection. Why do I think that? Because nobody's come up with really good explanations of the survival value, particularly for music, art, humor, and happiness. So if you want more on that, see The Mating Mind. Since then, I have particularly focused on general intelligence as a sort of core trait that's especially important in signaling good genes and good brain. General intelligence, good old-fashioned IQ, it has many aspects. You can express it verbally or spatially or abstractly or socially or emotionally. But it's really highly heritable. The heritability in adults of general IQ is about 0.8. That's almost as heritable as height, which is 0.9. And it's about as heritable as anything could be that's only measured with a certain level of reliability. And it's not just that there's one IQ gene or 10 IQ genes. The best recent work from University of Edinburgh suggests, using DNA chips, there are at least 500,000 genetic variants that influence IQ across all chromosomes. So IQ is a very, very strong sample of all the genes that seem to influence brain function. And we've also found that IQ correlates with lots of other desirable stuff, as you would expect. It correlates about 0.4 with body symmetry, 0.43 with brain size if you measure it in a structural MRI scanner, 0.15 with sperm quality and sperm count, and it also correlates with having fewer neurological abnormalities. And of course, IQ also predicts school grades, job performance in both white-collar and blue-collar jobs, mental and physical health, longevity, income, wealth, and in consumer behavior, how rational consumers are. How do you display intelligence? I'm not talking about posting your IQ score on Match.com. Why? Because it's not credible. You could fake it. The unfakeable signs of intelligence are things like good sense of humor. So we did a study of 400 UNM students where we measured their intelligence with good IQ measures, vocabulary, and Raven's matrices. And then they wrote captions for cartoons, like New Yorker cartoons, wrote the funniest captions they could, and then those were blindly rated by judges. And we found the verbal humor they were able to show correlated pretty heavily with intelligence. Those are the standardized beta weights, 0.67 for males, 0.51 for females. And then we also had self-reported short-term mating success. And the verbal humor also positively predicted number of sexual partners for both males and females. Right? So when you think of sexual selection for intelligence, don't think, geeking out, right, and reporting sports stats. Think of charismatic people like Louis C.K. or Maria Bamford or other stand-up comedians. How else do you display intelligence? Well, you can pick words to describe yourself. Here's a study where we asked 291 students, imagine you're trying to attract mates, you're writing a singles ad, like for Match.com. Write down 10 words that would make you as interesting as you possibly could be to a potential mate. And then we had other people rate how creative are these responses. So a bunch of students do this. And certain things students write are reliably rated as more creative. If a student writes down, I am kaleidoscopic, that's a creative response. You don't often see that in a singles ad. Or rambunctious, or ergonomic, or I'm a dodecahedron. No, you're not. I saw the students doing this survey. There were no dodecahedron in the room. Or, sort of mock narcissistic, some dude wrote, I'm omnipotent and immortal. The highly creative responses, of course, are rare. Typically only one student out of the whole sample writes these. The most common responses, nice hair, romantic, fun, outgoing, spiritual, nobody cares, don't bother me, are rated as less creative. Why does this matter? Well, more examples. We also asked these students, again, as if writing your profile for a singles ad, if you could be any other kind of animal for a day that would be kind of cool to be, what would you want to be? And these are verbatim responses. I'd want to be a spider monkey so my limbs would be highly mobile. Right? There's a spider monkey drinking water. I'd want to be a velociraptor to experience immense predatory power. I'd want to be a sea anemone. Very common responses, everybody wanted to be a cat, dog, bird, or dolphin. And you can see those are less intelligent responses because look, there's a dog missing the jump. And the spider monkey drinks the water, but the cat can't reach it. And the bird, just eating bread's not that hard. So, bread fail. So what predicted the rated verbal creativity? Well, we measured intelligence, but we also measured the so-called Big Five personality traits, the main personality traits that differentiate people. And one personality trait called openness to experience predicted verbal creativity about as strongly as intelligence did. So if you have a high score on this personality trait, that means you have an active imagination, aesthetic sensitivity, curiosity, variety seeking, novelty seeking. It also correlates with being politically liberal, actually. And those folks tended to have higher verbal creativity. So what does that mean? That means if somebody writes something like this in their singles ad, right, that's actually a kind of hard to fake indicator of both intelligence and openness. Okay, how do we get to consumer psychology? This is a matter of understanding, as all evolutionary psychology does, how do we get from prehistoric selection pressures that shaped our hunter-gatherer ancestors over the last couple of million years to understanding contemporary human nature as manifest in our DNA and our brains and our behavior. But how do we get from that human nature to modern consumer behavior? And that's the topic of my 2009 book, Spent: Sex, Evolution, and Consumer Behavior. Well, this is not a new idea. Way back in 1899, when Thorstein Veblen wrote Theory of the Leisure Class, he said, look, a lot of consumption is conspicuous. It's designed to impress others. Luxuries, like this Art Nouveau brooch, not coincidentally in the shape of a peacock, are there to signal wealth and elite taste. And there's a lot of work the last few years in evolutionary consumer psychology supporting this, particularly viewing conspicuous consumption as signaling to attract mates. So we have studies like these, and I won't go into any details here, but men in luxury cars are rated more attractive, duh. If you make people think about dating and mating, it makes men more motivated to acquire luxury goods, to spend money on luxuries rather than necessities. And it also makes men quicker to identify luxury brand logos in a visual array than they are if they haven't been thinking about dating. Women interpret conspicuous consumption by men as a signal of short-term mating effort. Oh, he's interested in an affair, not a wife. But it's also a status signal that, no, that's too complicated to explain. Never mind. The cool study I love is by Vladis Griskevicius, who's really a leading researcher in this area, showing that your local sex ratio, whether there's an excess of single women or single men, has a huge impact on consumer spending and debt. If there's more men than women, there's a scarcity of women, the men have to compete more. And in American towns and cities where that's true, the men rack up a lot more credit card debt, consumer debt, like thousands of dollars more. Conversely, if there's an excess of women, then the women tend to do more conspicuous consumption, as in Manhattan. Also, ovulating women at peak fertility dress more stylishly, as if fashion is just one signal among many, and they're more attracted to men displaying luxury goods. So that's all fine, you know, consumption, mating, whatever. But go back to these costly signaling principles and we can get a little bit more of a nuanced picture. Veblen was all about conspicuous waste, right? So the Veblen idea is very good at explaining brands like the Hummer, just a big, kick-ass vehicle that's heavy and expensive and burns a lot of petrol and is costly to insure and just intimidates and dominates. But not everybody likes Hummers. And indeed, many car brands are not positioned, to use the technical term, with regard to conspicuous waste. Some brands like Acura are all about accuracy of production, fit and finish. And that's an example of conspicuous precision. Other brands like the Mini Cooper, are all about demonstrating I'm some kind of cool hipster and my car is cooler than yours, and it's conspicuous creativity. And then other brands like BMW that actually aren't that reliable or good. Can I say that on? Oh, we might have to cut that out of the broadcast. They're not that good. They're just famous, right? The BMW logo is very well recognized because they invest a lot in advertising. And many consumerist signals, many luxury goods, many prestige brands combine all four of these principles. Right? So the Art Nouveau brooch has some conspicuous waste in terms of costly materials and the time invested in creating it, but a very high degree of precision, a lot of creativity. It's new, right? This was startlingly new style of art. And reputation, I think this is by Tiffany. Bugatti Veyron, the world's fastest production car, certainly has a lot of conspicuous waste. You really don't need 1,200 horsepower or a car that goes 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds with a top speed of 260 miles an hour that costs $1.2 million and that burns 2 gallons of petrol per minute at top speed. But you can't go that fast unless the car is made pretty precisely, right? Or the wheels will simply fall apart. So the speed isn't just about waste, it's also about demonstrating precise production. And it's a creative design, and Bugatti is a famous car brand for 80 years. Fashion obeys the same principles, all four of these signals, whether you're the Duchess of Cambridge or James Bond, right? Wedding dresses, men's suits. And the really expensive stuff that very rich people buy, like the Cézanne painting that recently was auctioned for $250 million. Or this house built in Mumbai by an Indian billionaire, the $700 million house. 40 stories, 600 servants, for a family of 2 with 2 kids. So, the traditional way that consumerist capitalism worked throughout most of the 20th century, the way that my grandparents taught me was the flow chart of success, right? Went kind of like this. Everybody has their level of genetic quality, but we're not allowed to talk about it, but it's there, and that determines your general intelligence, which we also are not allowed to measure directly because it's politically incorrect. But that allows you to get educational credentials from a high prestige institution, like NYU Stern Business School or SUNY New Paltz or whatever. That leads to skilled employment at a place like Goldman Sachs. That leads to income. And that allows you to do conspicuous consumption, like buying the BMW. And then eventually, that leads to mates and friends and reproductive success and social status. And that's the American dream, right? That's the flowchart of success. But one problem that's arisen in the last 10 years is there's a shortcut, right? Social media gives you a way to demonstrate these traits, intelligence, openness, agreeableness, directly through your Facebook posts. And people like Sam Gosling at UT Austin have demonstrated you can actually infer pretty accurately somebody's intelligence and Big Five personality traits from their Facebook status updates. Pressure's on. And if you do that well, it will lead directly to mates and friends. And you don't have to do all this stuff in the middle, necessarily. So the collapse of the American economy is not just a matter of evil iBankers, it's also people of your generation realizing, oh my God, I don't have to do all that. Why bother? Another problem with the traditional conspicuous consumption notion is, Veblen's right. In the Gilded Age, you did have people displaying monetary wealth and elite taste, but I don't think it's reasonable to think that there are very deep human instincts for doing that, for buying luxury goods to display monetary wealth and elite taste. Look, we've been social primates for 30 million years, where we care about status and prestige within our group. We've been hunter-gatherers for 2 million years. where we start gossiping about what other people are doing, and that's a basis for status and prestige. But we've only had wealth, monetary wealth, inheritable wealth, and elites and hierarchical societies and divisions of labor for about 10,000 years. And that might be enough time to nudge certain propensities a little bit in terms of being interested in money and elite taste. But I don't think it's likely to lead to very deep instincts for understanding money or for having really pretentious elite taste. So what are we demonstrating through runaway consumerism, if not just wealth and taste? Well, I already mentioned these central 6 mental traits that I think are important: general intelligence, or IQ, and then the big 5 personality traits: openness, conscientiousness, agreeableness, emotional stability, extroversion. It's a very strong consensus in personality psychology that these are the important personality traits that capture a lot of the variation. Why are these the central 6 traits? Well, the evidence from animal personality research now suggests that all of these traits, or most of them, are ancient across species. You can reliably rate and infer most of these traits in orangutans, gorillas, bonobos, chimpanzees. They've been individual differences, variables for a long time. We know from twin studies and adoption studies and DNA studies, genome-wide association studies, that all these traits are genetically heritable. They tend to be stable across life. If you're more conscientious than average at age 10, you'll tend to be more conscientious than average at age 80. All these traits are found universally across cultures. They're attractive to mates, friends, and kin. And when we meet people face to face, we kind of judge them unconsciously pretty accurately within a few minutes of face-to-face conversation, like on a date. How do we demonstrate them then through consumer purchases? Well, the notion would be there's certain kinds of products that position themselves in the marketplace as sort of ways to indicate higher or lower values on these traits. So if you're very smart, if you're at the upper end of the bell curve, you might do something like just buy products labeled smart, right? Like smart food, smart cars, smart water. You might buy the Rosetta Stone Mandarin Chinese software to learn Chinese, and if you succeed, you're smart. You might buy a smartphone that has mysterious apps that most people don't understand, and if you can master them, that's impressive. A lot of the feature creep, the addition of extraneous, relatively useless features in electronic gadgets, is probably more an intelligence indicator than anything that's practically useful in life. And then, of course, educational credentials are the single biggest, most expensive, most time-consuming way to demonstrate intelligence. On the other hand, if you want to demonstrate low intelligence, the marketplace obliges. And there are many, many ways to show I'm profoundly stupid, right? If you buy books like Homeopathic Care for Cats and Dogs, yeah, or Astrology for Dummies, which is just doubly stupid. But openness, the personality indicators are even kind of more interesting, because some people actually like to hang out with people who are low on some of these traits rather than high. So if you want to demonstrate that you're high in openness, interest in aesthetics and other cultures and novelty and variety, there are lots of ways to do that, right? You go to contemporary art fairs like Art Basel and you buy weird conceptual art. Apple, as a brand, with its brand equity worth more than $100 billion, where does that brand equity come from? It's because Apple signals openness, right? If you're a creative type, you use Apple, because all creative types do that. Anything alternative, alternative fashion, alternative music, that's all highly open. The whole foreign travel industry, right, where you can brag about, yeah, we went to Thailand on our honeymoon, and we've been to Vietnam, blah, blah, blah. But the low openness folks don't want to hang out with the high openness folks. Damn liberals. They move to Texas, and they buy other stuff, like the Barrett M82A1 sniper rifle that can shoot you dead through an inch of plate steel from a mile away, and which we clearly need. Or your political affiliations, indeed your political donations, can also indicate whether you're low or high in openness. And there's massive evidence now from political psychology and moral psychology that the principal thing distinguishing liberals from conservatives is openness. Conscientiousness is your ability to plan ahead, to keep your promises, to exert willpower and self-control. And there are lots of ways to demonstrate high conscientiousness in a consumer culture. The entire exercise and fitness industry, right? Raise your hands if you made a New Year's resolution to get in shape, right? January is the #1 month for people signing up, committing to year-long fitness and gym memberships that most of them will never use, and that's why it's a profitable business. Anything that requires skill, any hobby, like making furniture, is a conscientiousness indicator, and all the markets associated with that, the tools, the workshops, the garages. Saving for your pension is a major problem in economics and a major indicator of conscientiousness. And under capitalism, the consumer credit scoring agencies actually oblige by quantifying your conscientiousness with a little thing called your credit score. Do you pay your bills on time? Do you move around impulsively? Do you keep too much debt? Conscientiousness is principally signaled by your credit score, and that in turn is the major route to being able to get an auto or house loan to do yet more consumption. On the other hand, the low conscientiousness people who are impulsive, free spirits, right? There are lots of products that are available for them. Ben & Jerry's, right? Eat it all. The British company that makes pot noodles gives away a free battery-operated spinning fork to eat your pot noodles with because it's just too much trouble to twirl your fork in the pot noodles after you've waited for 90 seconds for them to cook. Agreeableness is another major dimension that's signaled by lots of products. On the low agreeableness end, you have psychopaths who like watching American Psycho and listen to death metal and drive Hummers, right? And buy Barrett sniper rifles. But a lot of the economy is about demonstrating high agreeableness, right? Gift giving, Christmas, birthdays, Valentine's Day this week, don't forget, buy your gifts now. Having dinner parties, right? Organizing social events, entertaining, it's an agreeableness indicator. It's about, I'm showing I'm a kind of altruistic person. Spoiling your kids with luxury branded sunglasses. Or, the ridiculous specter of having actual domesticated animals as pets, right? Why does that work? Because if you have a living border collie and you're out taking it for a walk, you're probably not a psychopath, and you're capable of being kind to it because it's manifestly still alive, or you just stole it, and that's attractive. Okay, to wrap up before we have questions, I wanted to analyze runaway consumerism as a sexual signaling system where both sexes are involved and both sexes are signaling to the other sex and to their rivals, because it's really important. It's a major threat to the global economy and to some degree people's happiness. You're all very aware that runaway consumerism, particularly insofar as it's based on conspicuous waste, has bad side effects on the planet, on other people who might be exploited or oppressed, on indigenous cultures. You're probably also familiar with the fact from happiness research that as GDP per capita as wealth increases, right, on the x-axis, if you plot different countries that have different degrees of wealth in terms of happiness levels, subjective well-being levels, when you're in a really poor country, yes, you're very, very miserable. But once you get up to a middle-income country like Brazil or Turkey or whatever, you're actually pretty happy. And additional wealth increases don't really matter much, right? The difference in happiness between a middle-income country and high-income is fairly low. So you get diminishing marginal returns in terms of economic growth. And for some countries, like Bhutan, where they've explicitly said we're going to maximize gross national happiness, not gross national product, or Britain, which has recently taken that turn, they've realized chasing economic growth as the number one criterion for policy is not necessarily sensible. Third problem is wealth can signal a fairly narrow range of traits such that sociopaths like American Psycho can flourish in certain industries like investment banking, right, with very toxic effects on the economy and society. And we just ran the business ethics course at NYU Stern Business School. For the second-year MBA students, I witnessed 40 hours of discussions with the MBA students grappling with ethical issues. And I thought, okay, it's not as bad as I thought. Only about 40% are clinical sociopaths. And yeah, we might have to cut that out of the... but they're all going into finance. A fourth problem is with credentialism as the main way to display intelligence, and then careerism, and then consumerism, it just delays mating for everybody, right? It delays marriage, it delays mating, and in many advanced countries, particularly in Europe, it leads to a really serious baby deficit where they just don't have enough young people to work to support all the old people. Why? Because they got caught up in runaway careerism and consumerism. I already mentioned that. How do we get out of it? What do we do? Well, the last few chapters of Spent, I sort of analyzed some policy changes that might be helpful where, okay, if we grant that we have these deep human instincts for displaying the central six traits, intelligence and the big five, through behavior, are there less toxic ways to do that impose fewer negative externalities on others, as economists call them? Well, economist Robert Frank at Cornell has suggested let's have consumption taxes instead of income taxes. That's an easy, efficient way to shift people's spending from runaway consumerism to investment or charity as a way of attaining social status. The new move towards green consumerism, where you're not just buying stuff for its utility value, but you're buying it as an indicator of your agreeableness or conscientiousness, like the whole food shopping I was making fun of. That's actually a good development if it's done intelligently. When investors are switching from just chasing, the highest risk-adjusted rate of return to saying, you know what, if we invest my money in things that are actually doing good, maybe I get even better returns, or maybe it's okay to get a lower return. So the rise of ethical investment and impact investing, where many, many high net worth individuals are thinking, how can I do investments that actually do good as well as bring me money? And then evidence-based charity, websites like GiveWell that say, look, don't just throw your money at huge inefficient charities. Pick the ones that actually give you the biggest bang for the buck. Pick the charities that indicate your intelligence and not just your kindness. That's another trend. Also, people are opting out of reality, right? Their whole economy is in places like Second Life, the online world, where you can buy this house in a virtual form for like $10. and kind of live there and attract mates and have parties, and it's a lot cheaper than doing it with real matter. I already mentioned people using social media, and I don't know if you've heard about the Google Glass that Larry Page of Google has been wearing around the New York subways last week. But that's an important development because this is a new form of glasses that can display digital information in your field of view. And what that means is that potentially if you combine it with, say, face recognition, then if I was wearing those, I might just be able to look out across the audience and see, oh, if you're willing to reveal it through the relevant databases, this is how much money you have, this is where it's ethically invested, this is how much you gave to charity last year. And if I can see that, I don't need to see how expensive your branded clothing is. Okay. I'll stop there, and I'm sure you don't have any questions, but I'll take some in case you do. Thank you. How long does it take for a woman to get to orgasm? Depends on the woman. Long enough to test how good a lover you are is probably the right answer. Okay. Less embarrassing question, please?
You talked briefly about social media, and I noticed in your presentation you used a lot of memes. Now, I read the study recently that was comparing songs that were comparing them like a top four of each other. And over as time has gone by, they've become more uniform in duration, key, structure, all that sort of thing. Do you think that having sort of this oversaturated market of creativity is kind of harming intelligence and creativity?
Yeah, so the question is about once you have a global sort of digital market for music or entertainment media, does that homogenize things and reduce creativity? I think the opposite is happening, actually, particularly in certain media that people care about, like this really is the golden age of television drama, right? Where things like The West Wing, House of Cards, Weeds, Dexter are just so much better than any TV available in the 70s. It's just not even funny. The diversity of different musical genres and subgenres and cross-fertilizations is vastly bigger than anything a previous generation had. The ability to produce independent films with much, much cheaper editing software, or to produce a dance track, right, that might go viral and make you gobs of money with a home computer, rather than having to rely on a 1980s music studio. I actually think we're living in the most creative era of human history by far, and that you guys are the beneficiaries of it. And the great thing about that, when I talk to my undergrads, is there's so many different niches and social subcultures where you can get status and make friends and attract mates, that you don't have to all compete to be investment bankers or whatever.
Do you think that the use of technology such as these new Google glasses that can actually potentially show a person's, well, everything about them would change the eccentric traits to being something completely different because social interactions will probably go down a lot?
Okay, so the question's about if we could do Google Glasses that showed everybody's, yeah, that'll be for the app developers to figure out, right? And it'll depend on what people are willing to have revealed about themselves. I don't think it'll change the central 6 traits because they're so heritable and stable and evolutionarily ancient. But what it might allow is much finer grained differentiations where, instead of just saying, oh, on Facebook, my political orientation is liberal or conservative or libertarian, you might have a much more nuanced, animated symbol that says, this is my political orientation with regard to these 14 top issues. So you might get more assortative socializing where you just end up in an echo chamber with like-minded people. But it'll also be easier to meet strangers on the street who share your interests and views. And the other cool thing is you might actually have a situation where if you're a convicted felon, maybe your Google Glasses can put a little like red X through you as you walk around. Or there's some shame-based system. So the problem with psychopaths is they're so hard to track in a big anonymous society. And you can meet somebody and have no idea who they are, where they're from, what their criminal record is. But if you see, oh, they worked at Goldman Sachs, stay away. That might be helpful.
I'd like to ask you about your claim that the instinct for the luxury goods is not very deep. So I understand how the accumulation of wealth is, we see that in the last 10,000 years of the Neolithic Revolution. But accumulating resources and distributing resources seems to go back further than that. So how does that fit in? How do we make sense of that? Resources versus luxury goods?
Yeah, so the question is about how deep back do the instincts for conspicuous consumption go. And I certainly agree with regard to hunter-gatherers. You do get a lot of conspicuous display where you get things like the big game hunting. Are you and your hunting buddies able to bring back a giraffe rather than just a little tapir? And you distribute the meat to everybody, and they all benefit, and they give you status and extra matings. That I think is very deep, right? But I would tend to think of that as kind of conspicuous charity rather than conspicuous consumption. I think this thing of buying really expensive stuff that's branded and hoping people will notice and give you kudos for that, we certainly learn it very quickly. It might have some deep kind of social psychological basis. But it's kind of an open question, and I think it does deserve further research. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. What about people who tend to shy away from buying luxury goods and stuff like that because they're conscious of what impacts it has? What does that say about them? Their willingness to attract.
Yeah, a lot of people are opting out of the conspicuous consumption system already and have been ever since the beatniks and the hippies and the hipsters and everybody else. And you get all sorts of wonderful subcultures like slackers, right, where it's basically about how long can you survive being an unemployed screenwriter. And they're also demonstrating stuff about themselves through doing that, right? Low conscientiousness might be more fun, maybe more agreeable. And if you look at the way that a lot of companies brand themselves, the brand differentiation between companies is not just on the basis of price, right? It's on the basis of signaling, consumer personality, right? What's the fit between our target market and the advertising image and the brand associations? That's what marketers spend all day and all night thinking about, not just price points and product features. Yeah.
Do you think the supplement slackers, as an example, could
Yeah, so if you're a successful unemployed slacker and you're still alive and you haven't starved to death, right, then you've been resourceful. You probably have a big social network where you trade favors with each other. You probably have to rent with roommates, and you must be getting along with them because they haven't killed you yet. And so there's also, the signaling perspective, again, is about the whole range of traits that you could be displaying through your whole lifestyle and not just your income. Yeah.
What do they mean when they say intelligent design?
So when I was talking about intelligent design, I was just sort of making fun of the creationist movement that says we were created 6,000 years ago by God as an intelligent designer. And my point here was just Darwin realized we were shaped by intelligent designers, but they were our ancestors, choosing mates and friends and offspring, not being shaped just by a deity. Okay. How much more time do we have, Glenn?
Why don't we take 2 more questions, and then
Okay.
people can ask at the reception as well.
Okay. In the very back corner?
Yeah, so you made a couple of interesting points about some of these traits, behavioral traits, personality traits being very stable and heritable. How robust is the genetic evidence that these things are not a meta phenomenon of rearing, and they are actually genetic phenomena that are subject to natural selection?
So the question is about the heritability and genetic basis and stability of these central 6 traits. I'm pretty convinced by the behavior genetic evidence. I think the twin studies, the adoption studies, and new methods like genomic complex trait analysis with many different samples that are very large all around the world are all converging on, very powerful evidence that these things really are there and they're subject to heritable genetic variation. And then the question arises, why is there still variation after all the selection? And that's a current outstanding question. I've written a little bit about it. People are still debating it. It's a very deep and interesting question. But of course, these things are all very shaped by culture. So Steve Pinker's recent book about the historical decline of violence means even though there's still heritable variation in agreeableness versus disagreeableness, or violence versus niceness, your culture will hugely influence overall rates of violence. So we still have psychopaths and they still commit the majority of violent crimes, but they commit many, many fewer violent crimes than they would have done in ancient Rome or medieval Oxford. Okay, one more question. Yeah.
Regarding the Facebook as a shortcut, is that ever, do you think that in the future that'll ever be a substitution for hard work and dedication into income, into conscious consumption, etc.?
I think Facebook and social media generally could substitute for most of the mating effort that we currently do before we get a mate. But then, of course, you have to feed your kids, right? And you have to make a living. And that's where things get tricky. And to the extent that the mate choosing you anticipates that need, you have to show you're not just a slacker, but you can actually bring home the bacon, make a living. But, under the current consumerist capitalist system, most of you guys spend an average of 15 years between puberty and actually settling down and getting married. And that's a fairly inefficient mating system from my point of view, if you can judge these central 6 traits in just a few minutes of face-to-face conversation or through Facebook postings. Okay, thanks a lot. Great questions.